Hello, everybody. Thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is another episode of what we call Books at Lux. And the idea behind Books at Lux is to highlight incredible people in our lives that have written books. I know we're living in the world of social media and short form Twitter and blog posts, but truly, I still believe that if you really want to learn something, you got to pick up a book and read. You got to cut down some trees, make some paper, write on it, and share with generations. So super excited today to have my friend and RLP, but that's also just a side thing. And then most importantly, our friend and our mentor, Guy, here with us. And we'll talk about it. My name is Bilal Zuberi. I'm a partner at Lux Capital, we're an early stage venture capital firm investing in deep technologies. I've been doing that for 20 years. And for a very large part of it, or almost all of it, he's been a partner with us. And it's been great to work with him and have his advice along the way as we build this firm and build the portfolio. We will be talking today about this book. I hope you guys can see it, The Present Future. And it is about technology. It is about Guy's understanding of science, engineering, innovation, entrepreneurship, and how's that driving society. And this is an incredible read. I've read this maybe a month or two ago, and then read it again last week to remind myself of some of the things and took so many notes. Guy is himself a scientist, computer scientist, and then a graduate degree in electrical engineering. And like all students of science, he's a student of science history as well. So this book is super exciting. But let's start. Guy, tell me a little bit about Grids Capital, and then we'll put it out of the way. But tell us a little bit about Grids Capital's work in this world.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bilal. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody that tuned in. So Grids Capital, it's basically a venture capital shop. We exclusively allocate into deep technology. And I'm very deliberate when I use the word allocate, right? Because our strategy is we build very generic portfolios in the deep tech world. So we do life sciences, we do robotics, we do airspace, we do new materials. We're very broad in scope. And because of my background as a risk manager, I've worked for a long time as a risk manager, I'm always trying to control or reduce or manage risks. So the way we did this at Grids is we find a group of exceptional managers. And of course, I've been lucky enough to have been working with Lux for 10 plus years now. And these managers are for us like magnets, right? That will attract some of the most interesting talent out there, entrepreneurs that have visions, that have ideas, that have incredible stamina to bring those visions to life, right? And through those GPs, through those partnerships we establish with those exceptional money managers, we start looking at very high quality companies, very high quality names. And through that process, we start building and enhancing our own vision of the world, our own thesis. And whenever there's a chance, we will cherry pick one or more companies that we feel that have a perfect match with our worldview. And we try to, as much as possible, help out in those cases, in those companies, and eventually that leads to direct investment. So if you check our website, you'll see not only our investment thesis, but some of those companies that we have already invested in, because there's this perfect match into their mission and our view of the world. So that's us, I think, in a nutshell.
Awesome. Awesome. Guy, we have so much to talk about. Let's start with this book. Why did you choose to write a book? I'm sure you're a very busy man. We barely find time to read books. You chose to write a book. Why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this began a few years ago when I started to write a weekly column at the most prestigious newspaper in Brazil, which is home for me at this point. So I started writing this week in, week out, then it eventually became a monthly column. But I started to write it pretty much as a stream of interconnected stories where you could pretty much pick any column that you wanted and read in any order you liked, but it was helpful if you could read it from A to Z. It's sort of like watching Seinfeld, and I know I'm dating myself here. You can enjoy a single episode, no problem, but if you know the story of all those four characters, it's more enjoyable. So after I don't know, 40 or 50 of those, I said, you know what? Maybe I should compile them and write a book, because writing has always been very much part of my life. I've been writing since I was really young, and reading and writing. And I've always thought I learned better when I wrote things. So that was an idea that was very natural to me. And when I started to write, back in, I guess the book idea was consolidated, I think in 2018, probably, I really started to dig myself in a very big hole, because it was not so much about taking what I had already written and putting that in a book. It was about taking that as almost the seed for a broader story. So now I had a canvas where I could elaborate and discuss, and really I was not constrained to 4,000 characters a week or whatever. So with that liberty, I went all in terms of trying to get as much information, as much color, as much trivia as possible, to help people understand a little bit of what you and I, we love and we study and we invest in day in and day out.
Yeah. So Guy, I'll pick up on that. The trivia, it was incredible. I love science history, love reading about how the sausage gets made, how inventions happen, and, the Westinghouse versus the Edison Electric, and the debates around what wins out, the Betamax versus VHS, and obviously all of that stuff. There were stories of Marilyn Monroe. I did not realize that she was identified as a model while she was working on a manufacturing line for drones.
Exactly.
There were stories of Galileo. Talk about the sausage making of a book. How do you do research? Did you have a whole bunch of research associates that were collecting stories? Was it you like researching this and collecting this? And it all flows so well. It's not just random stories in random places. Talk a little bit about it. Is this a research done for the book, or is this something you've just, this is how you acquire information in life?
Right. So no, I don't have this huge team of researchers. I have, there's an invisible hand that helped me tremendously with this book, who I'm hoping she's in the audience somewhere. My sister, who's also my partner at Grids Capital. So Isabel, she was really this powerhouse behind the scenes, helping me out whenever I chose a specific data point that I found incredibly interesting, and I wanted to make it more interesting to the reader. My only job was to pass it along to her, and she was able to create this data visualizations, choose the right photos to illustrate the point, to drive the point home. But other than her, it was a very individual effort. And I think that's, again, a little bit to my nature. I'm a little bit of a control freak, in the sense that I really didn't want to outsource a lot of the stuff that I really wanted to get across. Because very early on in the project, when I mentioned that I was digging a hole for myself, I realized that this was a series of rabbit holes where I could really explore and try to bring to light, right, a lot of information, a lot of nuggets that, as you said before, are not really all that well known. And that I think they illustrate in such a powerful and hopefully enjoyable form what technology is all about. We have this incredible illusion, if you will, that everything is an overnight success just because we learned about it, today or yesterday. But when you look at, either a Lux company that IPOs, or when you look at the discovery that makes headlines, or when you read about mRNA vaccines out there, you feel that, oh, okay, so they started working recently on that. And these are decades old technologies. And some of the technologies that we're seeing today, like, for instance, streaming, right? Streaming has been around for over 100 years. People could listen to music out of their power outlets in New York State in 1920, and they were charged on their electrical bill. Does that sound familiar at all? And that was streaming, and that's a technology that now people feel, oh, it just came across. So the idea behind the book and the trivia and all the process was me trying to bring light to the idea that the world that we live in is not just created out of nothing, right? This is a very natural evolution that has been going on pretty much ever since we as a species decided to cluster around cities, stop hunting, and started using agriculture as our main source of food. And everything then, since that point, has been civilization growing through technology. And this is not going to change. And this is one of the key points I try to get across. The only difference between now and let's call it 50, 100, or 200 years ago is the speed, right? Now things are moving so fast that we can actually perceive it. But if you take a step back and you look at the history of mankind, of humankind, you'll see that we have been in this trend of technologies and innovations driving society, driving change. And I didn't want that to fall between the cracks while I started to talk about one of the most important technologies for the 21st century, or how civilization is going to shape up in the next few decades. I really wanted to make sure that people understood that we're talking about not a snapshot of the world. We're talking about a movie, an evolution that has been happening for thousands of years.
This is fascinating. I want to ask you this then, and there are two questions that are related to each other. One is, you have a very unique vantage point. You're sitting in Brazil, right? It's not that far from the US, but it's not the US. And we here in the US sometimes tend to have a very US-centric view of innovation, entrepreneurship. We think, maybe beside with the exception of some Chinese companies now, TikTok or whatever, we think we've sort of invented entrepreneurship in some ways. Is this a global phenomenon? Is this happening everywhere as you've studied this history? And the second part of that is technology and this rapid pace of innovation, and this, COVID being an example of that. All of us are taking the same vaccines. You and I were chatting about vaccine invented by a Turkish immigrant into Germany, produced by an American company, can be given to a person in Brazil. Is this bringing the world closer together or not?
Okay, so two fantastic questions, and I'll pick them apart. So the first question regarding innovation here and the pace of innovation, right? And you're right, I have this fortunate genetic makeup because I'm first generation born in Brazil. For everyone who's watching us and wondering, Guy Perelmuter is not your typical Brazilian name, right? This has nothing to do with your typical Brazilian name, because I'm first generation born in Brazil. My parents are immigrants as well. They are from Belgium originally. They were dislocated because of the Second World War, us being Jewish and all. And so I have this interesting mix of an European background, a Latin American education, if you will, and a business life that has always been connected to the US. So I like to think that I try to take the best of each one of these worlds, because each one of them has amazing things to offer culturally and professionally and personally. And at the same time, I try to put my own spin on it. And the way I see it when it comes to innovation, and there, it's a very easy comparison for me to make, because we were very deliberate again when we chose deep technology, and we concentrate 90+% of our investments in the US. And this is because the US has become historically this magnet for talent, right? People from all walks of life, and you, Bilal, and your family are a perfect example, right? People who are brilliant, who are the best in their domains, they are attracted to study, to do their master's, their PhD, their post-PhD research. And the US has always had, with all its faults and troubles, has always had historically this welcoming environment, because let's not kid ourselves. I think the US knows what's good for business, and having smart people around is phenomenal for business. This is where great companies are built. This is where prosperity stems from. This is how a society moves forward. And I think that has been the case for a long time. And when people ask me about the end of the US domain in the whole geopolitical arena, the thing I point to the most is, look at the top 100 universities in the world, look at the top 50 research centers in the world. While the US dominate those lists, they're not going anywhere, right? They're going to keep dominance, because this is what the world is going to be all about. It's about brain power. It's about you being able to connect the dots. It's about you being able to innovate. So I would say that the engine of innovation, or the drive to innovate, is global, right? Everybody now, I think, everybody now considers a career in entrepreneurship, building their startup, doing their own thing. I think there has been this disconnect. A few generations ago, it was common for someone to work 30, 40, 50 years in one company, right? Which is the Japanese way of building a career. But recently, it's very unusual for you to meet someone, especially someone born in the mid to early 1990s, that has not had multiple work experiences. And I think this gets into people's psyche about, well, you know what, I should try to build my own thing, be my own boss, run things the way I think they should be run. And this is global, right? This is global. But for our investment thesis, which is deep technology, this is not gonna sprout everywhere, right? You need very special conditions for entrepreneurs that are dedicated to science and deep technology to be able to flourish. And so there are a few places in the world where this, I think, is visible, like Israel, for instance, or the US and Canada to some extent. But there's so many things that have to click for an entrepreneurial ecosystem in deep technology to work, right? You have to have not only the right schools, the right grants, governments must really pile up money in basic science. You have to have an early adopter, and this early adopter is often either the government or the military or both. If you look at the big changes that our lives have experienced over the past 50 years, right? The internet, computers, GPS, these are all technologies that started in universities or research centers, were founded by the government, by some agency or the other, and found their way into civilian life. But the internet was basically a military project to avoid a central point that could be brought down in a nuclear war and just dismantle the whole communication network in the US. So they wanted to diversify, to just distribute all those hubs. That's how the internet was born. And I talk about that in the book. The first test for the distributed communication over the internet was a marijuana exchange between, I think, a couple of students in 2 or 3 universities. So that's technology for you, right?
I did not know that was the first e-commerce that took place.
There you go. There you go.
Marijuana online.
Marijuana. Your second question regarding the, what was the second question
again? Is the world coming together? Is this a power for good? Source for good?
Right. So technology has this amazing ability to bring people who are far away together, but it also pushes people that are together far apart, right? And you don't need to look far to understand that. You look at the dinner table at a restaurant, you see 4 or 5 people looking into their phones and they're not together, right? The idea of togetherness has eluded us in this digital age where everything is accessible on our fingertips. So I think technology is great, but as every tool that we have ever created, it has to be used in a very conscious way, in a very deliberate manner. We have to control ourselves because, and again, we go into that in the book to some extent, there is this psychological reward that we as humans receive every time we see the little red dot on top of an icon in our telephone, in our smartphone, and you want to check out, what was that? Was someone liking my post? Was someone retweeting my post? Is someone connecting me to someone else? And we have this small doses of dopamine just charging us up. And I think that technology, by far and large, is a very positive force. We now know what's happening with people that we love and that we care about all over the world. My job is enabled by technology, right? I talk to people, I deal with people who are a few thousand miles away from me on a regular basis. And this is why you and I, we meet for lunch or dinner or breakfast. It's like we were just together, right? The distance is not that much of a hurdle. But I do feel that we are now in very dangerous territory with the use of social networks. If you look at suicide rates among young kids and teenagers and young adults, we are at all-time highs. And this, I think, has a very important correlation with the growth of social networks. Everything now is very out there, is very public. So I think the balance of power, it definitely makes technology a good thing. It brings us closer together, but we are now, I think, at a very critical point in our history where we have to create the countermeasures to avoid the technology dominates us and just takes over our lives.
You know, Guy, one of the things that I discuss even in our family at home is the need for focus and concentration and working through whatever it was, 10,000 hours equivalent or whatever that is. You have to work through the painful periods to be able to learn something. If you look at all the technology areas you cover in your book, from quantum computing to 3D printing to whatever, right? Even crypto and so on. These are complex areas of technology. You have to study them. You have to understand them. You have to innovate from deep within. Things that we admire in our lives took, as you said, sometimes years, if not decades, to come to fruition. We're living in a world where increasingly I feel that we want everything done like this, right? Hey, NFTs got invented maybe last year, and this year, why am I not a billionaire yet? Because something's wrong with me because I'm not a billionaire yet. How do we educate the new generation that wants to do good, that wants to solve important problems like climate change and otherwise, equity, diversity, and many other issues in society that they want to solve, but they want everything done like that, like within seconds. And that impatience is a virtue, but also perhaps we're taking attention away from the fields of science, the physics and the chemistry and the biology. That takes time. It doesn't work very fast sometimes. Talk a little bit about that in the historical context also that you saw while putting this book together.
Yes, again, a fantastic question. I'll actually draw on my experience as a parent, as a father, right? I have two kids. I have a 13-year-old boy and I have a 9-year-old girl. And they're, of course, all about YouTube and Roblox and Fortnite. And it's fine. It's normal. This is not going to rot their brains. This is not going to transform them into dysfunctional members of society. It's the equivalent of whatever we had when we were kids. And I'm done dating myself. So let's just leave it at that, right? I don't want to talk about the video games I played when I was a kid. But the two things that I really find that are great antidotes, if you will, to this horrible habit that society has formed, where you read 140 characters and you have full awareness of all the subtle nuances of any sort of topic, right? This is something that has plagued us because everybody now reads the headline. We have now the too long, didn't read. So you have to prepare yourself when you present something for an audience that is admitting, I'm not going to read it. If it's more than one page, couple of paragraphs, I'm not going to read it. So the way I try to handle that with my kids who are in those formative years where they're trying to still build the connections and build the way that they're going to learn is twofold, right? First one is they have to read every single day. It has to be a book, right? It has to be a physical book. They have their choice of subjects, of authors, but they have to read. And the way this works in my mind, at least, is the book is never, ever instantaneous, right? It will take you for a ride. It will take you from page 1 until page 400 or whatever, and it's going to build a world and build the characters, and you're going to imagine everything that's happening. And for everybody who has read the book that then became a movie, there's this immense pleasure in seeing what you imagined on the screen and realizing the differences between your imagination and the director's chair vision. So reading a book, not reading articles, not reading tweets, not reading posts, reading books. That's one. And the second one, which I think it's even more important, is learn how to play musical instrument, right? They have to learn how to, they can make their pick, violin, recorder, piano, guitar, I don't care, but you have to learn a musical instrument. And there's a very simple explanation to that. The learning of a musical instrument is something that is very technology agnostic because you change the methods, you have faster methods, more modern, but the way a sheet music is prepared hasn't changed for centuries. And guess what? It will not change. Music notation is what it is, right? And the power that you acquire by being able to unlock those circles and those scribbles on a sheet of paper and transforming them into music, which is, if you think about it, what really set us apart as a species. It's language, and there's no more universal language than music. So this is the pinnacle of our evolution as communicators. And there's no fast track to learning an instrument, right? You can learn 2 or 3 chords and play the guitar, and you can play like hundreds of pop songs. But if you really want to play an instrument and enjoy it, you'll have to put on the hours, you'll have to work, you'll have to realize that your brain works in a rhythm and in a speed that your hands will not be able to track. And so the discipline, the frustration, the patience, the knowledge building is something that I think it's a great counterpoint to the very rushed overflow of information that we're faced with every day.
Okay, Guy, this is fantastic. I have to talk to you a little bit about direct investments in technologies, and I'm going to talk to you about investing as an LP in funds. You cover so many different technology areas that we should probably touch on them and hear your views on them. Investing in deep tech, it's not for the faint of heart. It's all cool, it's all sexy, returns look good, but everybody's returns look good in 2020, 2021. But 10 years ago, when you became the early investor in Lux, this wasn't so trivial. We didn't have the track record that we have now. And certainly there weren't that many deep tech funds out there. We were sort of the outcast. We're like, yeah, that's science guys, they're just doing it maybe for the good of the world, but I want to make money. I'll go invest in these other guys. So what convinced you, like as an investor, right? We get it. We should invent amazing stuff, invent cures for cancer, and we should go to Mars, and we should have clean energy. But I can tell you, having invested in it for 13, 14 years, there's a whole bunch of areas in there that you really cannot make money in. Very hard today. And a lot of venture funds went out of business trying to invest in some of these areas because they thought they were interesting areas. But as an investor for you, why these areas as investable areas?
So that's a great question. And this has been, I've come to realize that this was not only when I considered my personal interests in science and technology and computers in general, but as an investor. I've been trained professionally as a risk manager for 20 years. I've worked looking at portfolios with all sorts of asset classes and trying to balance out the risks and the rewards. And that has become second nature to me. I am always looking at, and this may sound a little boring, but I'm always looking at the downside, right? As a professional, that's my mandate, right? I want my investors, because when everything is good, it's fine, it's dandy. When it's 2020 in the VC world, nobody's going to complain. The problem is when things start to go south and you have to have a plan in place, and you hope that you'll never use it, but you have to have a plan in place. And with that mindset, when I started looking into venture capital in general, which as so many people, I started investing as an angel. There's this entrepreneur, friend of mine, who was looking for one of the 3 Fs, right? Either family, either friend, or either fool. And he called me, right? I'd love to believe as a friend, maybe as a fool, I don't know. Regardless,
Free money.
Exactly. Regardless, I started to invest as an angel because I understood what he was doing. I know he was a smart guy. I thought that would be interesting. And that investment in particular worked out. There were, many others that didn't. But as time went by, and we're talking 20 years ago, I started to realize that something that as a risk manager, I was always chasing, which are investments with high barriers of entry and huge asymmetries that I could absolutely put my mind to work and find those opportunities at the time they were called emerging technologies or frontier technologies or whatever. Now they're the deep technologies of the world. But they really matched my view as an investor that, okay, I have 1 to lose, so I know that I can go to 0 here. But if this works, there's 5 or 10 or 20 to win, and there is a phenomenal barrier of entry, because unlike the soft tech startups of the world, the copycats will have a fantastically rough time trying to imitate the technologies that are dreamt by and that are built by PhDs, post-PhDs, people who have patents, who hold all those, I think, moats regarding their company and the world. So the way my investment thesis really came to fruition was when I was looking at the time it was taking for scientific papers that are published all over the planet to become patents, right? This was a process that took decades. And I started to look at that, and the more I read, the more I saw this shrink. And I said, what's happening now? It's because of the building blocks the technology brings to the table: sensors, microprocessors, memories, smartphones, internet, whatever. You have the time to market from a paper, a scientific paper, a patent, and a product shrinking, shrinking, and shrinking. And when you have that, it becomes investable, because now a lot of the money that was 100% at risk is dealt by governments, research institutions, philanthropies. So we're now living in this day and age where you de-risk part of your science and your technology at school. You use that money to advance science, to write science, to build a patent. Now every university worth its salt, they have a patent office, they have a technology transfer office, and you negotiate with that. And when I saw that, I said, this is a trend that is absolutely going to work. But mind you, when I did my master's in electrical engineering, I chose AI as my field of expertise, computer vision in particular, because I felt we were just on the cusp of this overflow of technologies in AI to the real world. And I was absolutely right, but 20 years too early. That thesis, which I started to be 100% convinced of, probably right by the time that Lehman broke in 2008 or 9, that syncs perfectly with my first meeting with Lux. First the introduction was made because the person who connected us, which is Chuck, of course, a friend of yours, of mine, and of the firm, he connected me to Lux because he said, you guys are so alike. I think you guys are going to hit it off. And here we are 13 years later, talking and experiencing all this huge, I think, coming to fruition of all those trends that I feel that are now going to be more important than ever. And the numbers are here, right? I think money managers all over the world are realizing that there's no turning back, that deep science, deep technology are the propellers of the industries of the future.
Yeah, we at Lux, as you know, like to say that we like to believe before others even understand. And a lot of these technology areas, in some ways, you have to be a little bit imagining the future, what it could be and should be. And you meet these scientists who are missionaries and these entrepreneurs who see a world that even frankly, we have a hard time imagining, right? Like even though I'm a scientist, I am not in the shoes of a Rick Fulop at Desktop Metal or Mike Ellenbogen at Evolve or founders at any of our companies, that they see a world and they're like, it needs to look like that. And as you said, sometimes they're 20 years too early. And then we're like, oh, well, we were right, but wrong. And sometimes magic happens. In these missionary founders and in missionary teams, there is this culture of specialization and generalization. We always talk about founders that are usually a pair or more, where there's like deeply technical founder, maybe a Nobel laureate. And it sounds like a joke, but you know how many of our portfolio companies have Nobel laureates as co-founders of the businesses, but deeply technical founders paired with amazing narrative tellers, storytellers, resource aggregators, and basically sellers, right? Talk a little bit about, in your experience, what is the importance of these two working together? And what are some of the lessons that come to your mind, having seen them through our eyes and also other investment firms that you've invested in, direct investments you've made? What does it take for a team to come together to be a winning team versus this crazy guy who's just, barking off the rooftops that, quantum computing needs to exist?
Right. No, this is interesting because as you were asking your question, it reminded me of something that happened to me, which one of those things that when it happens with you, you don't really realize the importance that that particular event had. But then with years of experience, you look back and say, well, that was an important meeting. And I'll share that with you because it goes to the heart of your question. And then I'll elaborate on what we look for and how we try to evaluate this apparent disconnect between the technical visionary and the salesperson, the business developer, the person that is actually going to the roadshow, make the sale, close the deal, make the money, right? So as an undergrad, I was doing my major in computer engineering, and I had in my last or second to last year, I worked for IBM as a trainee. And I worked at IBM for 1 year, and as my trainee was coming to a close, the manager, my boss at the time, he invited me to continue a fast track to senior management at IBM. He felt that I could build a very interesting career. And I was really flattered. And I said, listen, I appreciate that, but I have my mindset on doing a master's and then a PhD, which was very much in my flight plan at the time. But thank you so much, right? And so I refused the job offer, finished my major in computer engineering, went on to do my master's in electrical engineering, and so on and so forth. Anyway, a couple of years later, as I was struggling with the decision of actually doing my PhD, because I had received a scholarship, a full scholarship to pursue a computer vision PhD in the US. And the fear I had that I was committing to a career path in the academic world that could not be fulfilling for me. I had lunch with the very same manager who had been my boss at IBM a few years before that. And as we were chatting, he told me, and he was this very no nonsense type of person, very direct, very objective. And he said, listen, you're technical, you know numbers, you know math, it's great, it's fantastic. But I've never seen a better salesman in 35 years working at IBM, which means that you have the best of both worlds. And this is what you have to explore, because there are a lot of people technically oriented and a lot of great salespeople, but it's very unusual to see someone who combines both qualities. And that stuck with me after a while, after I started to work, and after time and time again, I was rewarded financially, not because I developed a specific platform or a very efficient way to calculate margin calls, but because I was able to close deals, to sell, to show people why they needed that product. And again, that ties perfectly into your question, which is the ability to create something, to build something, to develop something that wasn't there before. This is what you and me, and I'm guessing everybody at Lux gravitates towards, right? This is what we love: the vision, the passion, the technology, the ingenuity. But life teaches you that this is not enough. So the way I evaluate those startups and those companies is when we're convinced of the thesis, when we're convinced of the technology, when we're convinced that everything comes together, we want to really ask ourselves, do I see this founder, this CEO relinquishing power 2, 3, 4 years down the road to someone else because he or she are not the better suited to do the job, to hit the road, to make the sales, to close the deals? And this is one of the most challenging aspects of backing a startup, because when you look at that entrepreneur, you can only see him or her as a brilliant founder or scientist or technologist. But as an investor, they have to be something more, unless you are willing to take the chance that they will become good managers or good CEOs. And I think you guys at Lux, you consistently do a fantastic job of keeping the right people at that CEO chair. But when you feel that this is suboptimal, you make the changes. And this, I think, is in no small measure an explanation for why you guys have been hitting it all out of the park so consistently. So I think it's a very important question. And I think you have to evaluate that with a very cynical and a very objective point of view, because as much as I love technology and I'm attracted to that type of conversation, I know that I have a responsibility towards my LPs, that I have to be able to justify that investment, not only from a technical perspective, but maybe even more importantly, from a business perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I tell all the founders is that the most important title you will ever hold in the company is that of the founder. Every
Right.
other title will come and go.
Good one.
You
I'm
started
going to
this
use that.
mission to
I'm
solve
going
a
to
problem.
steal that. I'm going to steal that, and I'll give you all the royalties you need.
There
It's
you go.
perfect. I fully agree. Absolutely. You're absolutely
Yeah.
right.
Okay, so now we're going to go through a few technology areas really quickly before returning to the LP world. Okay, and we'll keep it quick. You write a lot about robotics here and automation, and we've invested a lot in robotics companies in automation and manufacturing, companies like Veo Robotics and Covariant and so many others. Robotics is something that's been around, what, 40, 50, 60 years, since 1960s, or maybe even before that. GM did early, work in automation. Rather than talking about where robotics is going, what will our world need to look like for humans and robots to work together? Robots need to learn how to live in our world, but we have to learn how to live in a robotics world. Autonomous cars means we will have to change our behavior, perhaps, because there's no human looking at us. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think the new world that we should get used to are not robots, but cobots, right? A little bit of history. The word was first used in the late 1930s in a Czech play where the root of the word robot in Czech means labor or forced labor, actually. So you can understand where it came from. And then it evolved eventually to be the robot that we all have been using for so much time. But the world where we're going to see the frontiers of interaction between man and machine, between software and hardware, between the tangible and the intangible, between data and information, all of those borders, they're going to narrow and are going to eventually merge. And I think that with robots, which are no picnic, they can kill you, we have to start forgetting about the existence of robots and thinking about the existence of cobots. And the cobots are literally the cooperative robots, are the robots that are here and they are aware of us, of our presence, of our limitations, of how fragile we are in terms of flesh and blood. And this is a trend that I do feel that is going to manifest itself in many ways. And you can see the beginnings of that when you start looking around and you see that in your home, you probably already have one or two robots. We have your vacuum cleaner, who is a robot. You have a couple of digital assistants who, if you put a little wheels on them to follow you around, all of a sudden they became a robot. And I think this is going to become more and more common. And if you look at every activity, both manufacturing, agriculture, and now services, you can see this trend of automation and of mechanization becoming irreversible.
Yeah, it feels like to me that robots should do what robots are good at, repetitive tasks, lifting heavy weights, that type of stuff, and humans should do what we're good at. And a second topic would be defense tech. And I specifically raise that because in America, we have this rah, rah, rah behavior around support our military, salute them, provide them with better technology. But you also have an international perspective. Obviously, defense has been, as you also said, been a big supporter of innovation and invention. But how do you think about this hyper war that people call it, where humans are not going to be involved in warfare? And I don't know, machines are fighting each other, or perhaps machines are fighting humans. What do you think are some of the implications of that? And where do you see who has the responsibility of managing the ethics involved? Is it government's responsibility? Scientists that are inventing this, Union of Concerned Scientists or something, or Federation of American Scientists that had to work against nuclear weapon proliferation? Where does the responsibility lie in making sure that these tools are not used for devastation, literally designed for devastation?
It's a great question and a deep one. So let's break this down with the one element that will be the constant in all of the discussions we have ever had, all the conflicts throughout history, right? Which is us, people, human beings, right? This was one of the joys that I took out from writing this book. One of the most exhilarating feelings is that feeling that you were able to unlock some knowledge of how the big picture starts to form. And one of those insights definitely had to do with human nature. We can sing and dance around this all we want, but we are, as human beings, we're jealous, we're petty, we're vindictive, we are competitive, we are aggressive, and everything society does, we try to dampen that. But if you look, ever since we became minimally cohesive as a species, you can see competition. The only reason why we started to cluster together is to find safety. And then we started to develop this social mind and to interact and to build teams. But even today, right, and you can see that if you look at social media, you can see that even today, it's us versus them, right? Why people write so much nonsense in social media, and how can they even believe that? It's because people are more willing to take, excuse me, their friends before taking the truth. They don't want to abdicate their social group, because if they believe, just to use a simple example, that the earth is not flat, it's round, then they're disappointing their social group. So even if they're convinced, if you can prove to them, because there are so many different ways to prove that the earth is actually round, and it's bizarre to me that we even have to have this discussion, they don't want to alienate their friends, their social group. So social groups are an incredibly powerful source. And James Clear has written extensively about that. It's a great read, right? Now, when you look at warfare, warfare will start and will end because of politics, because of people, because of leaders, state leaders. We're now entering the obvious next stage of the Cold War between the US and China. This is the world for the next few decades, obviously. And this is something that technology is going to play a role, not only when you talk about weapons or weaponization, right? Traditional missiles and drones and pilotless fighters. If you look, there's been a contest between the top guns in the US Navy versus an AI that flies itself. And they got their asses handed to them, pardon my French, because you're competing with an entity that doesn't have a body, doesn't feel 5, 8, 10G, that can do whatever they want. So I feel that it's not only about militarization and automation, it's also about cyber warfare. It's about what's happening as we speak, how you have foreign powers meddling with election results, meddling with industrial secrets, sowing seeds of chaos and disinformation. And all that is, again, inevitable and irreversible. So my take on that is that not only we as investors, we have a responsibility to be aware of that, but we have to invest and build the defense mechanisms to avoid those pitfalls. Better cybersecurity systems, better deepfake detectors, better military defense systems. And I strongly believe that the ideology of not wanting to get involved is quite naive for one simple reason. We're dealing with human nature. This is not changing. So we can take the high road and do nothing, but the cost of doing nothing, as we have seen throughout history, the cost of neutrality sometimes is annihilation. So I really feel that we have a duty to invest not only in the obvious weapons and missiles and planes or boats or whatever. We have to invest in the cyber warfare and bio warfare, because this is where, if you want to wage war, this is the way you're going to do it today. You can be sitting anywhere in the world and you can literally deploy chaos anywhere you want.
I think one of the things that we as investors certainly feel is ethics is front and center of our decision making. Individuals who are involved, technologies that are involved, the use of those technologies that are involved. It is no longer possible for the tech industry to say, we just eat pizza, write code, forget about us, don't talk to us. We're influencing people's lives. We're influencing, as you said, social networks are no longer just for finding dates. It is actually using, social networks are being used to topple governments and potentially cause chaos in democracies and perhaps also do a lot of good. We are change makers, and ethics becomes really important. One, quickly, if you could do that in 1 minute, which is crypto. Is this flattening the world, as Thomas Friedman would have said, or is it a China conspiracy against US dollar hegemony, as Josh Wolf likes to think and Peter Thiel likes to say, that this crypto is being pushed forward by our adversaries, American adversaries, so that the US dollar is no longer the reserve currency of the world.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with option C, which is neither of those, if I may.
Yes.
As someone who has been involved in financial markets forever, I've learned to respect the power and the footprint of central banks. And I don't touch crypto, not because I don't think there's merit to the idea, but because as a risk manager, I think that there's absolutely nothing stopping the European Union or the British Central Bank or the Fed to create a fully convertible, digital, blockchain-backed dollar, pound, or euro. And when that happens, I think a lot of the conversations we're having about Bitcoin or Dogecoin or Ethereum or whatever they come up with next are going to be muted. I'm not dismissing the idea of a digital value or reserve of value. I think that's something solid. But I think that people are mistaking the forest with the trees. I think the whole point of crypto is the blockchain. That's the technology that we should be paying attention to. That's really the game changer. And I don't feel that you should mess in an area where there's someone who is hundreds of times bigger than you and that can, by rule of law, effectively render your business obsolete. So I will not touch it for that particular reason. So option C.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think broadly speaking, I would say one of the things across all sciences, from life sciences to robotics, satellites, drones, everything, software is a big equalizer, right? I remember back when I was in grad school, this is like now I'm on dating myself, like 18 years or something, 20 years ago. The experimental scientist that I was, the experimental chemist, I had to go into lab and I had to turn knobs and I had to turn equipment and instruments. So I had to be in that little room in a building on the 17th floor of MIT building to do my experiments. My best friend was a theoretical chemist in my own department. He could sit in his home and code away and never come into the office. And I was like, this sucks. But he says, I can do work from anywhere. Now, he meant somewhere else in a house in Cambridge, but he could be, for all I know, in Germany. He could be in Pakistan. He could be anywhere. And I think that in many industries, as software and digitization becomes more common, we will start seeing talent emerge from other parts of the world that does not require that capex, so to say, which is a big hurdle for people to overcome and do this. I want to read something from your book as we end this session, and I want you to comment on it, right? We have discovered the enormity of the cosmos and the immense empty spaces that exist between galaxies. We have disassembled and reassembled the atom. We have manipulated the genetic code that is behind all living things. But now we are failing. Precisely when scientific discoveries and the most powerful inventions of history are in our hands, at the tasks that are critical to our survival, we're failing. Eliminating waste, controlling climate change, differentiating human from artificial, separating truth from lies. This was, I thought, a very powerful paragraph because science is objective. Science is fact. Humans then use science and engineering to do good or bad. And I think that's what you're saying, that we can do amazing things with this. We can bring the world together. We can cure diseases. We can improve people's livelihoods. We can give potable water to people, right? We can do so much good, but we're also using it to drop weapons on people. We're destroying their livelihoods. We're talking about biowarfare potentially. We're creating inequalities where the rich are so rich and the poor have barely enough to eat. Talk a little bit about your lesson for all the people who are watching, who are scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, how to think about this power of science.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. The mission that we have now, believe it or not, you would think that the rough part was to come up with all those advances, all those breakthroughs. But as a society, we are not raised to respect, value, and appreciate science. And I get it. It's hard. It's tough. You have to read, going back to our previous point, you have to study, you have to dedicate yourself to it. I think the big failure for me now, we have three incredibly challenging tasks ahead of us. So you have the climate crisis, you have food crisis, and you have the urbanization crisis. We're seeing one South Korea per year in terms of number of people migrating from rural areas to urban areas. And that's going to continue. We're going to be 10 billion people in less than 30 years. And there's no sign that the land mass that we use to grow food, crops, or cattle is going to increase to be able to supply that. So we live in this age where the challenges that are ahead of us are clear, are very well delineated, and we have resources, technologies, and insights to be able to handle them. But we get distracted, right? We're like this kid with attention deficit disorder. We have a task to do, but there's this cat playing the piano video, and that I rather spend time here. The concern that I have, and social media plays a big role here, is that we are missing our chance to capitalize on those amazing factors, the trends that we're looking at that are enabling us to do all the things that I've written about. And we are focusing on our petty differences. And because now I have a platform where I can tweet whatever, and everybody's going to listen, and they're going to feed me with feedback, and I'll be able to engage with them 24/7. That is a huge waste of energy, and we cannot underestimate that. If you look at the top 10 search terms that Google gets every single day, if you look at the Alexa ranking of websites that are more popular all over the world, you'll have a problem to wrap your mind around how come we're using the most sophisticated tool ever created to watch a video clip. And I'm all for watching music online, okay? Don't get me wrong. But we do not have to make that our primary goal, right? We have to use technology. We have to use the tools we built to really change society and to lift us up from all the poverty, death, famine that we had over our history, and bring those resources to as many people as possible all over the planet.
That is precisely the mission of Lux Capital. And more importantly, we're just honored not only that you support us, but that these entrepreneurs and these founders allow us to partner with them and do good, because there's so much amazing stuff that technology can do. You're immense for joining us. Thank you so much for doing that. This book is about not just the present and the future, but also the past of technology. And we have to learn from our past just as much as plan for the future. Thank you so much. Guy is on Twitter. He is very active. Please engage with him. Guy is a great mentor. He talks to a lot of people to give advice. If you're an investor looking at raising a fund or thinking about your fund and thinking about multi-generational fund, Guy is a person to reach out to. If you're a scientist and an entrepreneur who's looking at talking to investors and what that storytelling needs to be so that it appeals to people like myself, Guy's an investor in many deep tech funds. So he has a perspective. He also has a great Rolodex, so he can be helpful that way as well. And then you're just an overall nice guy and an awesome friend. Thank you so much. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you so much, Bilal.
Take care.